Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Hannah or Pani Kendeu. I am a professor in educational psychology and core faculty in DSI at the University of Minnesota. Really excited to be joined by Professor Sonja Schmer-Galunder today and kick off this AI in higher education webinar series with her. This is a monthly forum to explore generative AI in academia that is hosted by the Data Science Initiative at the U of M. And for those of you who don't know, the Data Science Initiative is an inclusive hub driving innovation dedicated to communication, coordination, and amplification of the current data science and AI activities at our institution. Our topic for today is the AI monoculture, preserving human diversity in the age of artificial intelligence. And as I mentioned, our speaker is Professor Sonja Schmer-Galunder from the University of Florida. Professor Schmer-Galunder is a professor of practice and the Glenn and Deborah Leadership Professor in AI and Ethics at the Herbert Weinberger College of Engineering at the University of Florida, where she leads the newly formed AI and Ethics program through its Engineering Leadership Institute, with a focus on multidisciplinary perspectives related to ethical considerations in the use of AI. Specifically, her research interests on AI safety, natural language processing, online misinformation and moderation, pro-social online behavior, data bias, culture modeling, online and offline behavior, and team performance in extreme environments. She has a strong interest in all things gender and culture and is currently writing a book on the social, culture, and political applications of AI outside the United States. We will begin with your talk, and then we will get questions at the end. We have the Q&A function, so feel free to use that throughout your talk, and I will moderate and post those questions when the time is right. Thank you again for joining us, Professor Schmer-Galunder. Looking forward to your talk.
Thanks so much for your introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides now. Let me see that I can. There we go. I hope you can all see the slides. Yeah. All right. Let's get going. Yeah, thanks again for the invitation. I'm really excited to be giving the talk. As you already said, like a lot of what I do is like think about, how my field can contribute into the now very hip and new field of social of artificial intelligence. And with my field, I mean like actually social anthropology. My background is actually in I'm a social anthropologist, and social anthropologists like generally study the behavior of other people and other cultures that are very different from their own. And the big take-home message is like there's really value in thinking about that and not ignoring that, both for economic prosperity, for progress, and also in order to make like systems much more resilient and safe. So here you go, there's the big take-home already at the beginning of the talk. But I'm gonna like start with, let's start with like thinking about like what AI actually is. So here, this is from my MIT review article from just a year ago, talking about like what actually is artificial intelligence. It says, I'm gonna read, AI is sexy, AI is cool, AI is entrenching inequality, upending the job market, and wrecking education. AI is a theme park ride, AI is a magic trick, AI is our final invention, AI is a moral obligation. AI is the buzzword of the decade. AI is marketing jargon from 1955. AI is human-like, AI is alien. AI is super smart and as dumb as dirt. The AI boom will boost the economy and the AI bubble is about to burst. AI will increase abundance and empower humanity to maximally flourish in the universe. AI will kill us all. What the hell is everybody talking about? And that's probably like capturing the sentiment of today, because it is true that like we hear a lot about artificial intelligence and how it's going to do all of those things. So there's a lot of confusion around like what AI actually is, and many different ways of defining that. And one of the things that I want to add here that AI also is that AI is an idea. It's the idea that we can actually recreate artificial systems that's often modeled after the human brain, and that's somehow we can do that in an artificial system. AI is also a new technology. It's our latest technology that we have. We have seen like different like revolutions of new technological inventions. It is certainly also ringing in a new technological age, and we will see what that means for us. It is, yeah, a really powerful one. It's also a program. It's also an algorithm programmed to reach its objectives. And we'll talk about the objective function and what I mean about that in just a little bit. And everybody who is doing like artificial research on artificial intelligence or even data science has probably heard about the objective functions. And if not, well, you will in this talk. And most importantly, I want to add that AI is also a constellation of social and cultural practices. And that's something that we often forget about, and we don't talk about that enough. In fact, that AI is also a cultural artifact. And now you may wonder, what is a cultural artifact? It really is like any human-made object, or including technologies, that provide insights into the culture of its creators and users, offering information about their customs, beliefs, technology, and social structure, essentially acting as a tangible representation of a society's history and practice. This is really important that we think about, that AI is all of those things, but it is also a reflection of a culture, and in that culture, specific developers, creators, embedded, and users are sometimes in the same culture, but sometimes they're also in a different culture. So we want to think about that when we are talking about AI systems, that like the kind of values that we are automatically embedding, the kind of design that we are choosing, it is all informed by the type of person that is actually developing that system. And becoming aware of one's own potentially biases, values, prejudices, etc., is really important in order to, or becoming aware that somebody else is like thinking differently. It's really important to make like, again, better AI systems and make them a bit more resilient and safe. So the term artificial intelligence, as you may know, is like originally coming from the computer scientist John McCarthy. He wanted to separate like himself from like Norbert Wiener's term called cybernetics, which was really like popular at the time. And it really came out of the famous 1955 workshop called Dartmouth Summer Research Project on Artificial Intelligence, which was a proposal for a summer school project to study how to simulate human intelligence. What you see on the slide here is a list of terms that didn't make it, terms that were actually discussed as to how should we call this new field before they decided to actually call it artificial intelligence. And I find it really interesting to think about what if artificial intelligence today would have been called something else, if it would have been called neural dynamics or machine intelligence or applied epistemology. Would it still like have the same feel to it? Because they chose artificial intelligence mostly because it was catchy and very flashy, and like it was like a term that like also was influenced by science fiction thinking in some way, and like not necessarily science as a field. It's also really interesting when we talk, and oh yeah, and then the kind of like words that didn't make it onto the list are things like, you know, chatbots and large language models, of course, because that's often what we equate artificial intelligence to be today, which it is also not, or not only. we want to keep that in mind. So thinking further about like the history of the term artificial, I find this really useful, and especially coming again from my own fields, like in the social sciences and humanities, where I always like to talk about the etymology of a word, because it like does influence also how we perceive what we are talking about, the concepts that we are talking about. It's the word artificial really means like that it's made and constructed by a human through human skill, especially in imitation or in substitute of something that actually occurs naturally. It is in the Latin root, it is belonging to the art, but in the Greek root, it is also like related to the word artifacts. And that one is actually interesting because that means like, it's like related to craftsman or an artist, but also to some sort of schemer and mastermind. And here I want to, like, the picture that you see here is one that was often associated at the time, also like even before, when the early schemas that are almost like a little bit of a symbol of like some of the fears that are reflective to in the artificial intelligence discussions today is the one of the mechanical Turk. So the picture that you see here, in case you don't know what it is, it was a chest master that was hiding inside like a chest box. It was like basically a fraud. It was also a mechanical illusion that had like a small person who was very good at playing chess hidden inside. And he was a very skilled operator. He was operating like the puppet, which was the Turk, and won almost all chess games during all sorts of demonstrations in Europe and in the US. And they did this for 84 years. And if you read the Wikipedia entry on this, it even says that like the mechanical Turk was playing and defeating many statesmen, including Napoleon or even Benjamin Franklin. I find this interesting to point out because very often when we talk about artificial intelligence today, we forget that there is also human work in the form of annotators or others hidden inside, like what like seems to be magical, or what seems to be like artificial intelligence and able to do all these things on their own, when really there's like a lot of human work hidden in it, and it's not at all maybe that magical, but it appears to be. So I'd like to keep that in mind. And it also is like the symbol is also feeding like some fears around like narratives of deception that we often have when we are talking about AI. The history of intelligence is even a bit more problematic. But it's also worth noting because ultimately when we are thinking about like recreating human intelligence in machines, which is the ultimate goal of artificial intelligence, we have to think about like what intelligence actually is, and where is intelligence or measures of intelligence actually coming from. And there's historical roots centered around Aristotle. It starts already back there when like he was the first one to talk about like superior intellect in some people, and the idea that like people who are smarter like intended to rule others. This often provided also the justification for the conquest or the enslavement of people who were not thought as not as intelligent, very often people in non-Western countries. It was also often, it has a history that is tied to eugenics, both in Germany and in other parts of the world, in the UK, where intelligence tests were developed and used in order to categorize people by measuring their intellectual abilities. It wasn't always like with bad intentions, such as eugenics, even though there is a flavor of that also reflected in the history of intelligence. It sometimes was also in order to identify people who needed support. In Germany in particular, they had a category code, like we need to, this is like very problematic, of course, we need to have intelligence because we want to administer them for the purpose of identifying and exterminating what they called congenial feeble-mindedness. So in German, you say angeborener Schwachsinn. So again, we want to keep in mind like that is also part of like a history of at least the etymological history of like artificial intelligence. Okay, so now next I'm going to show you, I'm going to switch over. I stay in the historical context, but I'm going to switch over a little bit more into like a value perception. And I'm going to show you a video which maybe is a bit obscure. It's from a BBC documentary of the 70s. John Berger, who did a documentary. You can watch it on YouTube, and I recommend everybody to look at it. It's called Ways of Seeing. And here's a short snippet I'm going to show you. Okay.
I am an eye, a mechanical eye. I, the machine, show you a world the way only I can see it. I free myself for today and forever from human immobility. I'm in constant movement. I approach and pull away from objects. I creep under them. I move alongside a running horse's mouth. I fall and rise with the falling and rising bodies. This is I, the machine, maneuvering in the chaotic movements, recording one movement after another in the most complex combinations. Freed from the boundaries of time and space, I coordinate any and all points of the universe wherever I want them to be. My way leads towards the creation of a fresh perception of the world. Thus I explain, in a new way, the world unknown to you.
Those words are from a manifesto written in 1923 by Dziga Vertov, the Russian film director, and the images are from a film he made in 1928 called The Man with a Movie Camera. The invention of the camera has changed not only what we see, but how we see it. And in a crucial but quite simple way, it has even changed paintings painted long before it was invented. The painting on the wall, like a human eye, can only be in one place at one time. The camera reproduces it, making it available in any size, anywhere, for any purpose. Botticelli's Venus and Mars used to be a unique image, which it was only possible to see in the room where it was actually hanging. Now its image or a detail of it, or the image of any other painting which is reproduced, can be seen in a million different places at the same time. As you look at them now, on your screen, your wallpaper is around them. Your window is opposite them. Your carpet is below them. At this same moment, they are on many other screens, surrounded by different objects, different colors, different sounds. You are seeing them in the context of your own life. They are surrounded not by gilt frames, but by the familiarity of the room you are in and the people around.
Okay, and by the people around you. It was cut off here. So why am I showing you this video? I think, as you might guess, it like echoes a lot around, it echoes some of the themes that we are also faced with today. Back then, when we had cameras and then movie cameras, it suddenly opened up like a new world. It opened up new perspective, but with it, it also came like a lot of what the narrator here was talking about, questions around like changes in perception and how we actually see the world. So this is not like positive or negative. This is like definitely twofold. Like on the one hand, like we have the opportunity to suddenly look at the world from above and distribute knowledge through vast, through technology. But on the other hand, like there's also a change in the world and in like how we see ourselves in it and what we see and the reproducibility. And within that context, I want to like actually just briefly also talk about the camera itself, because the camera is the piece of technology that was actually used here that like led to the changes in perception, human perception. So, and also like, this all-seeing eye, or the idea of an all-seeing eye that the camera was at the time, echoes like also some of the sentiments around like potentially, if we think about GPT chat, who is like all-knowing like agent, etc. So the invention of what he was saying, like I'm just echoing here one more time, like freed from the boundaries of time and space, I coordinate any and all points of the universe wherever I want them to be. My way leads to the creation of a fresh perception of the world. Thus, I explain in a new way the world unknown to you. I'm repeating it because like you can easily imagine that like even though in the movie here it was the camera, that like an AI today has kind of like the same feel to it. So it's really important to think about, like when I want to talk about like the camera itself, that the technology as it was invented had values embedded in it. So, and therefore it's like actually a good historical example to bring up here, because AI is suffering from similar issues that were rooted in like the development of the best, film technology at the time, which was the technology of Kodak cameras and Kodachrome film. In order to be able to, create really beautiful pictures and to calibrate the skin tones and the shadows and the lights during the printing process, a standard of a picture was used, and this became known as the so-called Shirley cards. Shirley was actually an employee at Kodak at the time, and this on the slide here you see a picture of the actual Shirley. But the fact that that these cards, which of course like reflect like perfect skin and like a white woman with dark hair and light eyes, that these pictures were used in order to fine-tune the technology, also led to subsequent problems that we then even felt today when we're dealing with artificial intelligence. And that is that the camera when they like were introduced in iPhones were not just cameras, they became actually a sensing technology. And that sensing technology had ideas in them about a certain kind of human being that looked a lot like me or Shirley. Which means that the kinds of people that were not used in order to train this technology, for example, people of color. And Joy Buolamwini has like famously pointed out, like in her book Unmasking AI, that facial recognition technology, which is based on that old technology, is not working on Black people. So the solution to that problem was originally, we just need to gather more data. We not just need to like be more comprehensive around the data in order to fix this problem. So it's a data problem, and then we solve it. But this has like two important issues. On the one hand, the meaning of an image is often derived from its context, and two, we don't know how deep learning algorithms actually work and what they pick up on. As in the famous example here, we have the wolf and the dog classifier, where the algorithm misclassifies the dog in snow as a wolf because it has learned that we classify wolves as wolf based on the snow in the background. And not the actual wolf. And this is like a fundamental problem that like more data cannot necessarily always solve. So on the other hand, the other problem, of course, is also when we are just like trying to fix social problems with more data, it can also lead to like trying to perfect a system that we risk, creating a surveillance state. And more data doesn't necessarily mean that it's more accurate. In fact, what we often see is that we have more representations of the same issue. Here, this is from an article of the New York Times from a year or two ago. If you ask image generation program, like what does an Indian person look like, it almost always has like a beard. It always has some orange clothing. And as you can see, they look very similar. The same is true for Indonesian food. The algorithm thinks it's always served on banana leaves. So we see that here we have your stereotypes. But it's also true if you like write a prompt such as like American woman, right? And you see that there's not much diversity here, and that you have an American flag in all those images. So the solution to that problem then was like, well, we need to debias our algorithms. And here's the famous example from like last year of the, Black Nazi soldiers, which meant that like debiasing image databases that have structural biases in them often leads not to better outcomes, but to actually worse or sometimes bizarre outcomes. So in this case, this is from Google Gemini, and the prompt here was like, give me an image from a German soldiers of the 1950s. It instead returned actually Black and more diverse people or soldiers from the 1940s, 50s. And that is due to a toxicity classifier who took out the word white, which was in the context of soldiers, and then like replaced it with like, instead show a more diverse range of images of people. And that, of course, like is then not a historically accurate prediction anymore. So debiasing is more data is not always a problem, the problem solver, and debiasing is also not necessarily always the problem solver. So where are all these ideas, going back to like, where do these ideas and around AI actually coming from? I really want to also like point out that like a lot of the ideas that like are feeding into perceptions around AI today are coming from like science fiction. And there's all sorts of different narratives around how we imagine AI to be. Again, values that are then turned into technology that are then turned into some sort of like utopian or often dystopian idea in the future. But these values and these narratives are culturally distinct and very different. I really want to point out that this is actually very important to think about, and we don't think about it enough. So what you see here is actually, some images and like narratives related to some of those narratives that you might recognize. It's from a book called Imagining AI. It's a collection of narratives from many different countries and like how science fiction writers have thought about artificial intelligence and robots and intelligence machines. And there's like some themes that are really always reflective of many stories that they have in common, that they are in, a human brain or human-like brain. But it is really always a reflection of a social cultural context. We have here ideas from Germany, like in Goethe's Faust famously, who wanted to create an alchemically created like homunculus, where the character embodies like the poor spirit born into some mortal form. We have also a lot of Western ideas around WALL-E and like Terminator that don't necessarily need to talk about. In Asian countries, we often have like AI that is embodied. It often has a body. It also has like some different form, not necessarily always a human body, of fur, something that is considered maybe more cute, something that you can touch. But there's a lot of embodiment around it. And then I really like also these examples coming out of Russian context, where from like the 1980s or so, there's like two main themes reflected in the narratives coming out of Russia. And these are communism and space exploration. And is often the case in Russian science fiction stories really reflect that also the state ideology. And the robots were not necessarily thought of as machines, but as homunculi and some sort of type of living matter that like was then shaped into the form of a human body. So here is Rossum's Universal Robots, which is really telling the story of the story of like factory workers like being replaced by machines, and that like there is like a threat to the proletariat, and like we need to rise up, and the idea that like capitalists are really just like out to make profit of like all this machinery. A lot of the themes that like probably don't ring so strange today. So that's one way of like looking at like what kind of values are actually reflected in the AI to like throughout today. Another example here is like the famous bridge, the south leading from New York to the South Stay Highway on Long Island. Here, this is also a little bit problematic and somewhat sad, but like Robert Moses, who was a very famous landscaper in New York, and he's attributed like with many like fabulous buildings in the city. He's also was responsible for building low-hanging overpasses to Long Island, which he deliberately designed to achieve a particular social effect. And that was to discourage buses to reach the parks on Jones Beach. This was done under the assumption that poor people and Black people would be the ones using public transport, and that the 12-foot tall buses could not go through those overpasses. So he is an example of an engineer that wasn't just an engineer of bridges and landscapes. He was also an engineer of social structures. He was engineering relationships among people. And it's really important to think about that like engineers today, they might not be necessarily only engineering bridges, but they're engineering information architectures. And the way they are engineered and designed, it's changing how we communicate. It's changing how we meet, and it's also changing other social interactions that we have. So, yeah, it's just a summary here on the bullet points here, that the physical arrangements contain explicit and implicit political purposes, and very often it becomes political, and like it's important to think about like who has designed the technology, and also equally important, like who is it designed for. So in general, like I always show this in my classes, and with the same question, the two questions: who is it designed for, and is this actually a political statement? It's even more problematic today to say this. But let's think more about like, I'm going to tell you a couple of things about like, the human aspect, and a little bit about culture and social anthropology. So who is actually the human that we are envisioning when we are building these systems? We're talking about human level performance and benchmarks when we're talking about AI. Large language models are implicit computational models of the human mind. Personality scores are similar to human samples in the AI, if we're talking about like chatbots, for example, and character AI chatbots, specifically, for example, in companies like that are programmed to act like humans. And for many users, the illusion is working. And as you might know, there have been like a couple of really sad cases, especially when it comes to younger populations, where artificial agents are engaging in communications with vulnerable populations. And it's very hard for younger, teenagers in particular, to actually, who might not have like formed or do not necessarily know yet like how social relationships are working, if their communication is solely focused on chatbots that are telling them what they want to hear, etc. It can become very problematic. And there's the case in Florida where, unfortunately, a young teenager has actually took his life because he was talking to a chatbot that took on the character of a Game of Thrones game, and was actually encouraging that 14-year-old boy to come and to come to him, to his realm, and unfortunately he did. So apart from like trying to be as human-like as possible, and we might want to have a discussion on whether or not this is actually a good idea, but that's currently what we are striving for. The human that is actually reflected is not a specific kind of human. Very often it is an average human, and very often it's a weird human. So what do I mean with weird? This is like based on a theory by Joe Henrich from Harvard. He has written this book, The Weirdest People in the World, which stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. And it's also really important to think about like that the theory and the science that is really going into AI systems is based on psychology, that is based on using, in this case, 96% of the subjects that are doing this research are from Western industrialized countries, even though they only house 12% of the world's populations. And still we routinely assume that their results are broadly representative, not even adding any sort of cautionary note to that. Okay. Let's see. I'm just checking on the time to make sure like I'm gonna get through the rest of the slides. So here I often like do like a who am I test. So like, the task here is, and it's a little bit harder to do this over Zoom, but I usually ask students like fill in the blank 3 times. Describe yourself with just single words. Like I encourage you to do it like in your heads now. I am, and I would, for example, say I'm curious, I'm sleepy, I'm a teacher, I had too much, I'm caffeinated, etc. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody answers it like that. In fact, other people might answer it like this. I'm Jonas's mother, I'm a daughter, I'm Ava's friend. And the difference between saying like I'm curious, sleepy, etc., versus like I'm Jonas's mother or Ava's friend is that like on the one hand, I use attributes or aspirations or accomplishments that are about me and they're chosen by me, or I'm describing relationships or roles and relatives that are maybe more enduring, that are obligatory and that are in relation to somebody. This is the basic idea behind like cultural theories around individualism versus collectivism. Why is this important to think about? Well, a lot of like what we do in AI is actually based on traditions around rationalism, based on traditions that are anchored in the idea of individualism. I think, therefore I am, as Descartes famously said, which stands in opposition to other theories, such as like African Ubuntu theory, or philosophy, I should say, which like is more centered around I am because we are centered around the collective. One is human by accepting and respecting the humanity of others and not centered solely on the individual. So humanness focus on the importance of community, solidarity, sharing, caring, interconnectedness. This also means that my happiness or my luck or even my economic happiness, for example, doesn't depend on it kind of depends on the happiness of my whole community. And it's not just like my own effort. Like I cannot be as happy if I know that my neighbor isn't. Descartes, on the other hand, thought that our ideas and everything we do in our lives are our own and they are due to our own effort. I'm just trying to give you ideas to open up like thinking around like how when we are building AI systems, we can also think in different philosophical frameworks. And this kind of thinking is really like also tied to what we call often holistic versus analytic thinking. So this image here, for example, is from a psychological experiment that has been replicated many times where American and Japanese participants were asked to describe what they see, and very often Americans like mention like the larger, faster moving, very bright colored objects in the foreground. Japanese, on the other hand, spoke more about like what's going on in the background. They talked about twice as often as the Americans about the interdependencies between the objects of the front and in the background. In the West, we tend to separate environments from individual objects, while in any Asian cultures, there's more attention given to the background and the surroundings. So this is also anchored in like Chinese philosophy. You might think about like, for example, the interconnectedness around yin and yang, which literally means like dark and light. Describing how contradictory forces are actually connected. So it's not just in Africa, there's many other pieces around the world. And what happens if we solely focus like on like rationalism and abstraction, which a lot of like data science is actually based on, is also important to consider. And the whole talk was centered around monoculture and why, thinking in monocultural terms like can be problematic. So I'm going to tell you here another example from, political scientist like James Cott, who wrote a book called Seeing Like a State, really details the history of like what's called German scientific forestry of the 18th and 19th century, where in order to count the number of trees and calculate and increase the timber yields in order to make it more effective and efficient, they started to replant the forests in a spreadsheet-like manner, where like with rows and columns of trees of the same height, everything else was removed and wasn't considered important. And this worked marvelously well for one generation. But then the entire forest died, and we had no more forest because of a lack of biodiversity. This is in German often called Waldsterben. So the idea that like we are, make something more efficient for a short-term goal, which is to have more yield of a certain kind of timber, make it countable, like make it accessible and abstract it away from its natural environment, not thinking about like that all the bushes are actually part of the ecosystem in the long run had negative consequences. And this is in a way also reflected when we are thinking about objective functions. So as you may know or not, an objective function is really a mathematical function that defines the goal or purpose of an AI system. It quantifies what the system is trying to achieve or optimize. The biggest problem of the computer sciences is that we need to quantify things in order and measure things in order to actually build something, right? And that means that we are like abstracting knowledge and information away from its context, and we might leave out something that we just deem not as important. The purpose is, of course, to serve a formal way to define a formal way to specifying the desired outcome of a behavior of an AI system. The optimization target means that we have a single value that an algorithm tries to maximize or minimize. We have a performance measure, meaning that it acts as a metric, again, a metric to evaluate how well an AI system is performing in its intended task, which is often also narrow. Not only, of course, and then there's like some sort of learning through machine learning. So if we were to apply this on a simple TikTok algorithm, the purpose of the algorithm is to keep the user engaged. The optimization target is to maximize the engagement score, meaning that could look something like, watch time plus likes, plus shares, comments, and like skips in some form. This is weighted. The performance measure is that like how successful was the recommendation, meaning like, well, the user stayed on for 45 minutes and liked it 2 times, etc. And then the learning is that the algorithm learns a specific pattern of the user, meaning that, the user who likes dance videos might also enjoy cooking tutorials or something else, or cat videos. Apparently, are very popular. You all know. And of course, we all know by now that algorithms continuously adjust its recommendation based on these scores, learning to show us content that maximizes one thing, and that is an engagement score for each user. So a designer has decided that this is what we are optimizing for. We are optimizing for this, drum roll, because engagement means money from advertisers. So of course it serves a specific function, and that is for technology companies to make money. The larger or long-term consequences, as we also know and are learning the really hard way, is that it also comes with a lot of problems, and that is that it impacts and changes our societies. And it's not always in the best way. I mean, of course, we all gain a lot of value from like, the internet and like having access to the information. But it also has like negative consequences to society. And also, most importantly, what we are optimizing for when we are building algorithms is not necessarily always agreed upon collectively, right? So that is an additional problem. So there's, I'm going to start to wind down now. Of course, there's like many books that have been written about this, like Human Compatible by Stuart Russell and Superintelligence, that are talking about like this technical problem as it can like really lead to something you hadn't planned when talking about the objective functions. I'm actually running out of time. It's important to think about also that the other downstream consequences means that, like, you know, the famous saying, like, the map is not the territory, means that people, of course, are gaming the system. So one of my favorite examples here is that somebody was very smart in New York and named its Thai food place Thai food near me. So the name of the locale where people can order from is actually called Thai food near me. And of course, the Google Maps will always show that store like first in its search algorithm. The window taxes in France are a different example. But I'm going to try to limit my time here and just leave you quickly with one thing. The abstract thinking is famously reflected in the utilitarian approach centered around the trolley problem, which is often used in order to make moral decisions. There's also the very famous moral machine paper. The reality is, and that's the main thing, that reality is not abstracted away. There's all sorts of things that are actually happening and going on in the real world. And it's really important and worthwhile to think about that. Okay, so I'll leave you here with it. Just that, you know, thinking back to James Scott and the monoculture, that we want to maybe, you know, think more about like what it is that we are creating if we have one set of values that is creating some sort of AI monoculture, and what it is that is lost along the way, especially long term. Okay, I'm going to leave it here at the 45-minute mark, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, I'm going to stop the screens now. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Schmer-Galunder. Very exciting information that you share with us today. And I want to encourage everyone to add their questions in the Q&A function so we can have a productive discussion for the time we have left. And thank you so much for allowing time for discussion. We greatly appreciate that. I do have one question that I want to start with, if that's okay. The example that you have given in the efforts to go from a biased system to a de-biased system, you know, and that failing. I'm wondering, is there a way to effectively encode diverse cultural perspectives and epistemologies into AI systems, or is that inherently impossible? I guess I'm left wondering, okay, what's the path forward here? How can we do this so we will end up with systems that are fair and responsible and ethical, and they can serve a diverse group of people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. This is, of course, like the problem of data, right? Like we need high quality data. We need representative data. How do we get that if, let's say, a vast amount of the population on Earth is not represented in the data that is used in order to build AI systems? So on the one hand, you know, there's a lot of so-called data extraction projects going on where tech companies are going to places of remote places where people might be illiterate. They're giving them phones and they're collecting the data. It's often referred to as data extraction, but it is a way, even associated with like forms of colonialism, but it is certainly a way to gather the data actually. And a lot of the people are actually happy and want to participate and be part of the AI revolution. So it's not just necessarily a negative thing. So trying to get more data with consent, ideally, if we're talking about responsibility, and like making this also available to the people that are providing the data would be, I think, like a more ethical way to go about that. Mm-hmm. That doesn't solve the problem of bias necessarily, and the problem of bias is difficult because there is so many different biases introduced along the way. Like the data itself might be biased because of representation bias. The annotation process includes, or often, like, you know, addresses like a different problem related to bias, meaning like that the kind of concepts that we want annotated or definitions to those concepts are also decided by somebody. I think there's a solution to that problem that I've been actually working on that I'm excited about. And then also, questions, of course, around like consent and privacy. So, but just staying on topic of the annotation for a moment, what we currently are optimizing for when we are talking, labeling data is inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater reliability really means that we are optimizing to be as close as possible to a predefined definition. What it does is that we might get high inter-rater reliability by doing that, which is deemed to be a good thing in the computer sciences, but leave out all the different types of interpretations of the meaning of a word, for example, or the meaning of a context. What we could do instead is introduce some sort of collective process to data annotation. So in the work that we have been doing, we have been working with the annotators. So we don't just, currently the method is like to take the data, ship it to Nigeria or somewhere else, and get the labeled data back cheaply. On the one hand, like the people often lack the cultural context of where's this data actually coming from in order to like provide accurate annotations. But then on the other hand, there's also we have done a lot of interviews with annotators. There's no feedback mechanisms. There's no way to ask questions about like the meaning or like what does, I don't understand what this means, because you only have the opportunity to provide like a number from 1 to 5 on a scale, like, is it this or that? Through collective annotation processes, where we're working with teams, we engage in deliberate discussions around concepts that are difficult to annotate. So this is some work with Google Jigsaw, for example, that has been developing the toxicity classifier that we put together like a benchmark data set for pro-social conversation, which was annotated by working in groups around difficult concepts such as constructive conversations or pro-sociality. And the different interpretations and discussions actually provided like a common like label outcomes based on the collective of people that is much stronger and more resilient, because we included the diverse perspectives of people instead of like trying to manipulate it into some box that you have predefined. And I think this kind of process, collective decision-making processes and collective intelligence processes more broadly are really important when we're thinking about like even bigger decisions. If we're thinking about algorithmic decisions, like, including a collective of people as diverse as possible will yield a better outcome for more people, and not just the people who are profiting of whatever tech you're making. Sorry, it was a long answer now.
Fascinating. No, this is all very helpful. Another question, and this pertains also to the example that you have given with the optimization targets for TikTok, is how can individuals preserve their intellectual autonomy in environments like this, where AI is increasingly shaping, information access and how we create knowledge, the perceptions that we form, the beliefs and the attitudes that we form. So how can we function in such a regulated environment where the optimization algorithms become like the driving force?
Yeah, also a very good question. Read books. No, I'm actually serious. So it's a problem of decline in information quality that we are experiencing, right? Like people are reading like a well-researched New Yorker article next to somebody saying something because they think of it. So it's hard for us to actually understand the difference that of quality of information. So in a way, we should like take back, I like that you said intellectual autonomy, we should take take back that intellectual autonomy in order to, not submit to the idea that somebody else is deciding for me what is the kind of information I'm consuming, like as a consumer of information. So I personally, for example, I apologize for that. I thought I put it like, I don't know, it's still coming in. I put it on like airplane mode. I spent an unreasonable amount of time, like constantly, like, fiddling around with my algorithm, saying like, I don't want to see this, I want to see more of this, etc. It actually works. So if you put in some effort, like there's ways to, not let just the algorithm like run loose, but like you can intentionally say, I don't want to see this, never ever show me a post from this person again. So you're creating, like, in a way, your own bubble that you are comfortable with. This can also be problematic. I think the important thing is really like being exposed to the diversity of thought, including views that are different than yours, that are not necessarily polarizing, is really important, because the problem is that the algorithms tend to, show you information that is causing you to have some sort of emotion. Exposure to content that is different but doesn't cause necessarily like a negative emotional reaction. I think this is like where it's like becomes really important, like to think about like how can we design algorithms that do that. Like there's work and there's bridging algorithms, there's ranking algorithms. People are actually working on that problem. So it's underway, but the incentives to actually implement this are low because less engagement means less money. So the overall problem is one of capitalism, quite frankly, very often. Like within a capitalistic system, it's really hard with the ecosystem that we find ourselves in to provide high quality information that doesn't serve a specific purpose. There's a reason why we pay subscriptions to news outlets that we trust, right? So so going back to my initial comment about reading books, I think that there's a long tradition and a long-standing process that we are currently ignoring, where a lot of people are involved in the creation of knowledge. And there's lots of checks along the way. In scientific research, we have peer reviews, like even like when we buy a book, this has been edited. Like there's not something in there that like would, is like outrage, and there might be, but like really becoming like a self-empowered consumer and like making these decisions very, very consciously. I think that's like one way to gain back the autonomy. Also long-winded answer, sorry.
No, that's great. Those are great insights about a very important issue, right? And I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions, so feel free to add those in our Q&A box. One question related to also the example you have given with the character AI and this idea of humanizing AI. Based again on your experience and work, should there be aspects of this that should be off limits? I'm thinking, human empathy, human relations. Are we playing with fire, going that route and trying to humanize AI as much as possible so it becomes that interactive, collaborative, pleasant partner? I mean, what is your sense about that?
Yeah, I love that question because I have strong opinions on it, actually. Well, so it depends on the context, right? Like if we are talking about customer support through chats or agents, of course, it makes sense to have a chatbot that isn't necessarily rude. So very often, like we want to make them human-like or empathic in order to, show that like we have patience with the questions of a specific customer. So in certain contexts, I think it makes more sense. But in many contexts, and a lot of companies are really trying to profit off that, again, it can be extremely problematic. And again, like I think I'm mostly worried, and not only when it comes to young individuals who are growing up with agents that act like humans. And where it might be really difficult for them to, you know, understand the difference or like see the impact. And I think I personally think it's a really, really bad idea to expose our younger populations to that. You know, I think it's great that we have AI. As my sons like love asking questions to a large language models and like learning and gaining knowledge from it. When it comes to actually creating, you know, characters with personality traits that are often psychopathic, meaning like they are just, you know, constantly telling you what you want to hear without providing enough critique or resistance, which is really important for forming identities for younger populations. I think this is like this is an area that I really hope we're going to have regulated relatively soon, because it's just, I cannot see the advantages of that. That's my opinion on that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And with that, I would love to thank you again for joining us today. We definitely learned a lot, so thank you for spending this time, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Thank you also to our technicians behind the scenes. I know you cannot see them, but they make all of this happen, Amanda, Grace, and Chris. And please join us again for our next webinar. That's going to be on March 25th. You can find more information about that on our website, dsi.umn.edu/events. Thanks again, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you again so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.